relationship with, abusive men or women. And then they will find this absolutely wonderful, praise be to God, individual that doesn't abuse them. But it's so fascinating. Once you find somebody that won't abuse you, you become bored with them and start doing things to sabotage the relationship. Fascinating to watch. And in working with individuals, you're constantly having to alert them. Now, which part of you is running this? What is this part of you that doesn't want you to be married behind this? That wants you to sit in your room alone and drink? And so there's a whole literature on the antilibidinal ego, and there's a whole literature on a different wing of that talking about toxic introdex. That is, the parts of us which modern psychoanalysis recognizes as inner entities, real inner entities that are out to kill us. And now remember, this is not Jungian thought. This is other schools of psychoanalysis which recognize these compulsive, destructive forces within the psyche that are out to destroy the human life of the person. Usually they are perfectionistic. Usually they are rageful and full of hatred and envy. And we'll get more into the marks of that stuff tomorrow. But these parts of the psyche usually are full of rage, and they are inconsolable. In other words, nothing anybody could ever do would ever satisfy them. We don't have enough time to get into Melanie Klein, but she is another person. She's a Freudian, but she's been accused of being a Jungian because she believes that there are, in fact, these innate drives in the psyche which fuel hate and envy. And if the person cannot learn to cope and counteract these inner enemies, these parts of the psyche that want to destroy the beloved and want to destroy the good life, then they will die. Probably by suicide, maybe by other forms of depression or compulsive behavior. Now, the school of thought that I want to recommend, the non-Jungian school that's most interesting and most easily related to Jung, is the school of Kohut's self-psychology. Heinz, H-E-I-N-Z, Kohut, K-O-H-U-T. His self-psychology. In self-psychology, they make a very clear statement. It's very interesting. Pathological behavior is the result of an individual's not being able to cope with the power of the grandiose self-organization within. Now think about this now. Get this now. I want you to try to get you ready for the understanding of what the archetypal self is in Jungian thought. Yes. Yeah, yes. But what I want you to get about this is that we're not talking theology here. We're not talking some sort of abstraction. We're talking about clinical phenomena that atheists see. When they look at pathological personalities, they see, these Kohutian self-psychologists notice the way in which this thing inside, an inner psychological structure, discernible by anybody that has an eye to see, called the grandiose self-organization, or variously called the grandiose exhibitionistic self-organization, that if the personality, if the human self is not able to relate to that thing adequately, they will be mentally ill. And we're going to get into the marks of that shortly. But one of the things it does is the grandiosity takes the personality over in some way. That is, the infantile grandiosity destroys the human being. And the great struggle of the human personality, according to that school, is to learn to function in spite of the reality of this potential enemy within. Now, in terms of Jungian thought, it's very interesting. This grandiose self-organization is not necessarily an enemy. It's only an enemy if you don't relate to it correctly. which gets us to Jung. See, if you study this stuff, then you understand why human beings have so much trouble. Now, if you're one of these nice Pollyannish humanistic psychologists that think that there's nothing bad in there, everything in there is friendly. But I want you to know that the greatest of the depth psychologists and the psychoanalytic theorists, not just Jungians, know that everything in there is not friendly. There are some things in there, if you don't learn how to deal with it, will kill you. And we'll do it fast. As fast as possible. And so if you're trying to figure out why you get into so much mischief, you got help. And in terms of our work here, what I would want to argue is that you got to understand that it's not all your ego's fault. That is to say, it's your ego's responsibility. Nobody else is going to handle it for you. But there are forces in the psyche that are not your ego that would like to see you dead. Okay. Now, classical Jungian theory. Now, I want to make clear, I'm not one of these so-called archetypal psychologists. I'm interested in a psychology of the archetypes. That's different. Archetypal psychology, that's kind of a large claim. I wouldn't want to be the author of an archetypal psychology. That's a high claim, and that means the prototypical psychology. I'm just doing a simple sort of journeyman, plain old, down-home, ordinary psychology of archetypes. Now, orthodox, quote-unquote, Jungian theory, plain old centrist theory, says there's an archetypal self. Now, this archetypal self is a psychological entity. It is real. It is not a theological construct. It parallels, in these theories, the grandiose self-organization that the Freudians have now finally discovered and think they invented. See? In other words, it glows with what Jung called what? Numinosity. Thank you. People have studied this stuff. This thing is numinous. It glows with power. And this is power that is greater than human power. It is the stuff of Rudolf Otto's Mysterium Tremendum, Mysterium Fascinans. And Jung, throughout his entire work, makes it very clear the ego must differentiate from that. The best book that you can read on this whole process is Edinger's book called Ego and Archetype. And in that book, he shows how through the human life cycle, the ego, the I of the person, begins merged with that, but gradually differentiates from it, and in the healthy, mature personality, has what Edinger calls, and I like this formulation, an ego-self-axis, or connection. Notice that the ego is not identified with the archetypal self, but is connected with it. What happens if the ego in an adult is not appropriately differentiated from the archetypal self? Well, infantile grandiosity in spades. Jungians just use the word inflation. I like that. I think of a basketball, you know. You with your little air hose and your deflated basketball, and so you plug it in and you watch the basketball, you know, fill out. Well, the archetypal self is full of energy. And it will fill up the little basketball of your ego. But you got to know when to take the thing off. Right? You've seen these pictures in cartoons of the people that can't get off of the air hose and they start to float. Well, that's the metaphor here in Jungian thought. That is, there is energy coming off of that archetypal self, and you need it. You got to have it. If you don't have it, you will not be inflated. You will be deflated, or what? Depressed. Right. So hubris, the hubris of the Greeks, the pride of the Christian tradition, read Reinhold Niebuhr's Nature and Destiny of Man, occurs when the ego in some way